So thanks to both of you for joining us today for a conversation about outdoors photography. My name is Kristen Gunther. I'm a conservation advocate for the Wyoming Council. I'm particularly excited to get some tips from Nick because I'm a terrible outdoors photographer and I really want to know what to do, what I can do better so that when I'm outside in the winds, in the Wyoming range, in the desert, I can actually come home with pictures that I feel excited about. So I'm excited about that, but what I'd like to do before we get started, since we have the both of you here, I'd love if you both introduced yourself, talk about what you do, and maybe shared a little bit about what got you into photography, and what kinds of photos you like, what interests you. And so maybe we'll start with Nick, since you're our special expert, and then go to Alan.
Thanks, Kristen, for having us here. My name's Nick Kanoke. I've been taking photos for about 5 years now. Not that long, but I've taken probably millions of photos in that time, which was my first suggestion to you, Kristen. I think I take a lot of terrible photos as well, but it's just key to be determined, keep taking photos, and just be selective about kind of what you are sharing with the world. Yeah, as far as like how I started, it was actually in New Zealand. I spent a semester abroad there and had a few extra months at the end of that, kind of touring around the South Island. And just the landscape totally inspired me. I mean, my friends and travel partners inspired me as well, and kind of the Maori culture there, the native indigenous people there, also inspired me. Just trying to capture kind of the beauty that I was seeing and have something to share with my family, who was thousands of miles away. And something to share with my grandparents and my little sister, to give them a visual of the experience that I was having. And so yeah, I still, to this day, that was kind of the start, but to this day I still love landscape photography, maybe most of all. I do a little bit of wildlife photography when animals appear in my landscapes, and then I like shooting people as well, just because I find myself generally, well, except for the last 6 months, I generally find myself surrounded by people, and they inspire me a lot as well. So I end up taking lots of photos of them, pretty candid. I don't do a ton of like portrait, cover photo stuff, but have been known to do a little bit of that. Yeah, that's basically me, and I'm starting to see the importance of like visuals, images, video, all that stuff for conservation and things, like not just as an inspiration for me and my family, but for the world who maybe has less access to these beautiful wild places, and just give them show them some of the things that I see, and some of the things that I see that are worth protecting.
Absolutely.
All right, am I up?
You're up, Alan.
Hey everybody, my name's Alan Rodgers. I'm the communications director at the Wyoming Outdoor Council. Before I started at the Outdoor Council, I was a journalist and an editor. I actually started my career as a photojournalist, later worked as a photo editor. So I did that in some capacity for about 15 years, and I was doing photography before that. I think I first picked up a camera when I was in high school, which is, would have been more than 20 years ago, which is horrifying. But I didn't have a whole lot of direction when I first started. I had friends that were interested in film and talking about film school and things like that. And I said, well, that sounds cool, but like, how does, where do you even begin to do something like that? So I had my dad's old Olympus rangefinder film camera that I was tinkering around with. When I was young, we did a lot of camping, hiking, spent a lot of time outdoors. So I always had a camera along. And really what kind of cemented for me, like how, what the capabilities of, or the potential for landscape photography was when I was about 17. My family took the classic American road trip out west, and spent a lot of time in Arches National Park and Canyonlands, Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and some other parts of Colorado and Utah, and just the wide open landscapes, the wildflowers, the rock formations, just the gorgeous sunsets, were really just eye-opening for me. So that's kind of where I kind of came into myself as a photographer, and really quickly went a whole other direction. I studied journalism in college, went a very another way with my photography. So maybe ironically, to this day, landscapes are actually one of my weaker suits. Even after being a professional photographer for a decade and a half, it is very challenging, and I think part of that is because so much is out of your control in the natural world, and if you can't rely on the subject to do what you want it to do, or to make any decisions that might make your job easier. So even now, after doing this for a long time, I still feel like I have a whole lot to learn. And one of the things that I'm kind of glad about that I can, now that I've kind of moved on from being a photographer professionally, is I can kind of get back to some of those things that drew me to photography originally. So I've been doing, a little more kind of outdoors photography than I had been previously. And I've been loving it. So I'm happy to be here and learn a little more.
Yeah, what I love about that, Alan, is that we both have a lot to learn from Nick in this conversation. So I'm excited for that part of it. And really quickly, the reason that we're having this conversation is because the Outdoor Council is launching our annual calendar contest. And so we know lots of folks love sending in photographs of wildlife and landscapes. This year, we're making an extra push to solicit photos of people out enjoying the natural resources of Wyoming that we all love. Our theme this year is Our Wyoming. And so we really want to represent just like the full breadth of experiences that people in Wyoming and around Wyoming have with the incredibly diverse outdoors resources we have here. So to do that, we want to make sure that everybody feels really empowered to go outside and take beautiful photos. So if you haven't gotten a chance to watch Nick's awesome video where he walks you through some important basic advice for when to go out, how to think about framing. Again, as Nick, you already mentioned to me, reminding me, take lots and lots of photos. It's the way to get better at it. And so I hope folks consult that as a resource. But what I was hoping to do today, as again, a rookie photographer, is I've found some in my own kind of like outdoors photography and pursuits. I've got some questions about how to capture some of those things. And I'm hoping, Nick, that you can add some insight into that. So without any further ado, my first question, another area that I'm a rookie at is I'm a very enthusiastic, although not yet entirely skilled angler, specifically fly fisher woman. And so often I'm trying to like take really beautiful photos of bodies of water, whether it's rivers or lakes. And sometimes I feel like that's really hard because maybe there's like a lot of glare on the water, or the lighting is wrong, then it gets really washed out, or I don't know how to frame it. So do you have any good tips for how to compose a photo or think about taking a photo where there's like a body of water involved?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just first disclaimer, I haven't done a ton of that. I take photos around some of the lakes and rivers here in Wyoming, but I've never been a big coast guy. So I haven't, and I've never been, on long sailing trips or anything like that. So I don't have a ton of experience in this area specifically, but, I can certainly say that water is reflective, so all the issues of kind of colors being blown out because of too much light or whatever are definitely present in that sort of an environment. So just classic stuff, golden hour is best, You know, and if the sun's straight overhead, you know, just finding some unique different angles or some shade helps a lot. I've seen some really amazing photos recently of people, you know, taking a photo of a fish really close up. You know, they've just caught the fish and they're kind of releasing it back into the water, and just the glistening, like liquid gold of just a thin layer of water over the shape of the fish is like so stunning. And so I would, you know, kind of either figure out what your focus and your subject is. Is it you, the angler? Is it the fish? Is it the body of water itself? Or take photos of all of them is kind of my standard, is like, think of all the subjects that there could be in kind of a frame or in an environment, and then, you know, focus on each in turn. And then go back and look at, you know, what you've got and figure out, oh no, it really was about the water. I mean, the fish was a great way to see the water, but it really was about that water and the golden light. And, you know, just, I mean, water is an amazing material, whatever it is, you know, it's just, you know, from a science perspective, it's a very unique, not element, but, you know, H2O. And it really is cool. So I would inspire you to, yeah, take photos of the water specifically. Think of the water as your subject in and of itself, and then how you can highlight kind of the really exciting nature of that subject with a fish or an angler or a forest or anything like that. And then as a last thought, maybe get closer than you think, maybe closer than is safe if your camera's not waterproof. Because I've also seen some really cool shots, you know, half in the water, half out of the water, or just really at, you know, kind of the level of the wave, that sort of thing. I've seen some really good stuff in that. Other than that, I don't know.
That's all fantastic advice. Yeah, I really love the idea of thinking about water as the subject itself. I think that's a really cool way to think about it, and certainly inspires me a little bit. Alan, did you have anything you wanted to throw in? Food for thought?
Not too much to add. Probably just the only, maybe one thing I might echo a little bit, when Nick mentioned the kind of the golden hour light. You know, overcast days or overcast times of day are also good. I mean, foggy mornings are just really beautiful, like out over the lake or over a creek. Just because it kind of, you know, your sky, you know, most times a day, you know, your sky is always going to be naturally so much brighter than anything else. So anytime you can kind of close the gap in those tones, like, you're going to get a lot of good results.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be like a recurring theme for sure. Just like how you can, you know, like you said, Alan, when you're outside, you cannot control your subject or your lighting, you know, to some degree or any of that. So finding ways to mitigate the broad daylight is key, and not being lazy essentially is key too. I mean, if you really want to take great photos, getting up early in the summertime when the early morning is really early, you got to do it, you know, or go out on those overcast days, or find the cloud, or, you know, these other things that can help too. But the golden hour is key.
Yep. Set 5 or 6 alarms if you have to. That's my way of doing it. I was hoping I could, I guess I can kind of see on our 2020 calendar, there's a great, like, the cover photo. I don't know if this is going to show up effectively. Nope, it's going to be washed out. But if you check out our cover photo, I feel like it's a really good example of what you're talking about in terms of timing, an hour light, playing with reflection. It's kind of an unusual angle than what you might think. So just a really beautiful photo. Okay, here's another question. So as somebody who does not have either a waterproof camera or really a nice camera at all, I'm often using my iPhone for photos. Will that work for taking good photos? And if so, is there anything you'd recommend in terms of thinking about how to use your iPhone for taking good outdoor photography?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I think iPhone photography, or just camera phone photography in general, kind of just, you have less tools at your disposal, so you really have to double down on the central elements of a good photo, which if you watch my video, the things that I pretty much talk about are lighting and framing, and that's what you have to work with primarily with a camera phone. I mean, you don't have any settings to account for bad lighting, and you don't really have, you know, as a physical zoom, so you can't really like change the frame as much as you might be able to on a different camera. But you know, all the same elements are important and at play. You know, just finding that golden hour or that overcast or something, so that, you know, the sky isn't just like blazing down, you know, straight down light or whatever and washing out all the colors. Just finding ways to get the colors and the shapes of the land with shadow and all that stuff is super important. And then and also, actually, I've found with iPhone photography, sometimes my iPhone seems to respond better to those like hard midday lighting conditions than my expensive camera. Weirdly enough, you know, like if I try to take a photo in the middle of the day with my nice camera, I'm just doomed to fail, and I don't even try anymore. But sometimes I pull out my iPhone, and whatever software, maybe artificially intelligent software is in there, it's doing a great job of kind of mitigating that challenging environment. So yeah, I put a lot of faith in a good camera phone these days, and I mean, especially because they're exceedingly packable. I mean, I'm often pretty far back there when I'm getting my best shots, and the landscape is most inspiring. So if I don't have to bring a big camera and a tripod, that's ideal. Yeah, other than that, you know, just really think about framing, think about what your subject is. You know, if your eye was caught by something, figure out what's catching your eye, and kind of what, like, why is it catching your eye? Is there a story behind it, or is it just like a crazy phenomenon, like crazy snow that, you know, you can just see every crystal on it? You know, is that really what's catching you, or is it kind of like the misty mountain in the background? You know, think about the foreground, think about the background, and think about, yeah, just how to highlight the most stunning aspect of things. That's all I would say. Just, you know, really hone your focus. Think hard about what it is that you were trying to take a photo of, and put that, you know, front and center kind of.
That's all really useful, because I do want people to know that, you know, some of the photos in our 2020 calendar, and I believe the year before, did come from camera phones, that there were some really beautiful shots that made it into the final calendar that totally people just snapped on an iPhone or whatever. So it's very doable.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all really good advice. Thank you. Okay, I have a question, and Alan, after I ask Nick, I'd be interested if, as sort of someone with a journalistic eye, if you think about this question. So there are certain landscapes in this state that are just very highly photographed, right? Like, you know, the Teton, that really classic shot of the Tetons in the Snake River, or, you know, certain places in the winds where, you know, they're just incredibly inspiring places. And so you know, people love to take photos of them. Do you have any advice for when people are in places like that? If there's a way that you think about kind of creatively capturing sort of like commonly photographed places from different angles, how you think about that, what you would suggest for people who want to maybe take photos in those places, but maybe want to try to put their own spin on it, or think about a different way to represent a well-photographed place.
You wanted me to answer that first, Kristen? Okay. Yeah, I mean, initially I'm just thinking, you know, go a little farther, you know, like most of the people are going to be lazy taking photos by the highway. So if you can get even 100 yards away from there, or a few miles down a trail, or up on a nearby peak, or anything like that, you have a much greater chance of taking kind of a unique photo of a common place, essentially, or an iconic place. And then other than that, just kind of thinking more about your framing and the subject. And so, like, if you're taking photos of the Grand Teton, you know, thinking about, okay, well, what if my subject isn't the Grand, it's the clouds kind of swirling above the Grand? Or, you know, if I get it at the right time and there's clouds kind of obscuring part of the Grand, you know, is the photo made more interesting and unique because it leaves a little up to, the viewer's imagination or something. Thinking about the foreground maybe, so like finding some really nice wildflowers or a unique, like dry, old, twisted, gnarled piece of wood on the ground, kind of focusing more on that and having that iconic shape in the background, maybe even a little fuzzy, something that people will recognize, but kind of changing the focus a little bit. Yeah, I think those are my main ideas there.
Yeah, those are all great points. And incorporating something more personal into it too, like your friends or family or partner or spouse. Who are you experiencing that place with, or even strangers. If there's in the taking the Snake River example, like there might be whitewater rafters coming down. Things like that. There might be people cycling by. There might be a bison wandering, up towards by the road. So yeah, just finding ways to just make it your own. And one good point, you mentioned, Nick, most people will just pull off the highway. I mean, that's absolutely right. You don't need to, especially if this is, a place that's relatively close to home in Wyoming, that's accessible. You can maybe it's literally in your neighborhood, maybe it's somewhere you can visit a couple times a year. Don't limit yourself to the sign on the highway that has the picture of the camera on it where they want you to stop. Get into the backcountry, shoot up at the mountains, flip the camera around, see the opposite view, go to Idaho and, take that photo from the other side. There's just always, so many options. But that said, there's still, I occasionally find in situations like that, it's still satisfying to take like your version of the iconic photo. So there's nothing wrong with, your interpretation of, it doesn't matter how many times it's been done before. The reason it's been done before is because, wow, it's a stunning scene, and it, people have an emotional response to it. So there's nothing wrong with going the generic route too, if that makes you happy. It's also a great way to learn, figuring out, how did this other photographer accomplish what I'm trying to do? And, it just kind of eliminates, just kind of eliminate those variables and figure out, how you can, have that same kind of control or that same result.
Circling back to the fact that we are more actively soliciting photos of people in the outdoors this year. A lot of those photos are going to involve outdoor recreation in some form, whether it's climbing or hunting or skiing or backpacking or fishing or whatever. I mean, all kinds of different ways to be in the outdoors. Do you have any advice, Nick, for capturing photos? Oh, thanks, Alan. That's a landscape.
Yeah.
Now I feel awkward because it's just my office. So do you have any advice, Nick, for capturing photos of kind of outdoor activities that kind of tell an interesting story, or maybe show dimensions? Like a really good example is like, a lot of us have seen the same like hunting photo 99 out of 100 times, right? But the really interesting stories, the really interesting photos are often, the pictures that you don't often see of the kind of like leading up early on in a hunt, like having coffee and glassing and that kind of thing. And, for a lot of different outdoor pursuits, there are sort of tropes in images we see a lot. So do you have any tips for how to think creatively about capturing people in outdoor activity?
Yeah, I thought about this, and one thing that came to mind is kind of like, I guess for the calendar contest, standalone images, but a lot of times I feel like a photo series has so much like exponentially more power to tell a story with nuance and, share experience. A photo series, a number of photos rather than just a standalone image. So my initial thought is like, man, if you can, rather than, yeah, that grin and grip, got my dead animal that I killed, photo, taking photos in the morning, of that like swirling coffee in the just, brightening sun, and and you guys kind of crawling on all fours through the thick grass and spotting for stuff, and then kind of hiking things out, and the day progressing. That sort of stuff is all really powerful in telling a more full story. But as far as standalone images go, just if you want to accentuate the story, just I urge you again to just get really just think hard about it, and say, what is the subject? What is the story of that subject? Is this a photo about the land, about an animal, or about a human? Or is it about how all three are kind of, doing their thing and making it work? And then, and then just trying to highlight that idea, whatever you settle on. So if it's man and his pursuit, maybe an early morning, looking through the glass, searching. It doesn't need to be the person's face. They can be looking away, because they're just kind of representing all of us, kind of searching for whatever we're on the hunt for. If it's more about the animal, then, thinking more about the animal and its habitat, maybe how the animal sees things. So like almost like turn the camera back on the hunters walking up, something like that. And then, yeah, other than that, just thinking about the mood. I don't know if we'd mentioned kind of like color tones and stuff, but depending on the story you're trying to tell, if it's about, like the hardships of life, if it's about kind of like the fear and uncertainty and the challenges of, the various things that we pursue, you don't want all the happy, bright, shiny colors of like a field of wildflowers necessarily to highlight that story. Maybe you're looking for more of a dark and stormy, overcast or evening or early morning, something that, you can feel the uncertainty just without even looking at the images, but just feeling the colors, the warmth or the coldness of the colors, or, things like that. So just, if you're really trying to tell a story with a single image, break it down, think about, what you're focusing on, and again, how just to highlight that with every tool you have at your disposal, including the color scheme and everything.
I love that in terms of thinking about really any outdoor activity, like, the story of like different kinds of days climbing, and like what it's
Yeah.
try something you never tried before, and how certain times of day and certain colors and like photographing rock a certain way could tell a really different story of a day out climbing. And
Absolutely.
similarly, like skiing, like there's a difference between like going out for like a really mellow day and trying something hard that really intimidates you a little bit, and kind of working to overcome that.
Yeah.
I really love the idea of really thinking about like what is going on with this day and this activity, and like how can I set my photos up to tell that story. I think that's really awesome advice.
If I can add one thing there, I think for me, where I have the most trouble with this, if I'm out doing some kind of outdoor activity, I feel like, oh, I don't want to stop what I'm doing to take a photo. I don't want to, I want to take my pack off again and get my camera out. Or like I came out on this hike to relax. I don't want to have my phone in my hand the whole time. Which is, I mean, so for me, like I miss out on a lot of photos that I would have loved to have for that reason. So I think just trying to make, if you want to come back with nice photos from something you've been enjoying outside, just make taking photos make that part of your routine. Like while you're, have your camera or your phone or whatever it is, accessible. Don't make it like a chore that you have to do something, go through all these extra steps. Just have it there. For me, I've got kind of a, I rarely, unless I'm specifically out, trying to get nice photos for a real reason. If they're just photos I want to have for myself, if I'm out camping with my family, I don't bring my big camera. Like I've got a small kind of, it's like a nicer point and shoot type camera. It's small enough that I can it doesn't need a case. I can just throw it in my backpack or my camelback. I can throw it over my shoulder, not think about it, and it can just be there, and I can pull it up and snap photos when I want to. And it's, it becomes harder when you're doing, like, when I'm hunting. Like I've taken like 3 photos ever when I've been hunting that didn't involve me and a dead animal, because you're so focused on the task at hand, that it just sometimes it's not practical, and that's okay. But just have a have a plan for how you're going to make that work, because just having the equipment available and just having the mindset that, oh, I want to take photos as I go along, that goes a long way.
Awesome. Before we wrap it up, Alan, I want to make sure, you said you were looking forward to learning things from Nick. So if there's anything that you wanted to bring up or ask about before we kind of adjourn, or ask you guys for any parting thoughts, anything you'd like to bring up?
Oh gosh, I'm sure there's so much you could teach me, Nick. So maybe we'll get out there together someday, and you can give me a little lesson. God, I guess I'm just curious, how do you go about, or how do you approach, trying to incorporate, human subjects into a landscape?
That's a great question, and something that I definitely talked about a little bit in the video that I made, because it's one of those things that I think y'all at the Outdoor Council are highlighting this year is photos that include human subjects in landscapes that they're enjoying. And so I talked about, humans are a little trickier subjects than mountains in a way. I mean, sometimes they're more willing to do what you ask them to do, but not always. Sometimes they are more flighty than a deer. So I talked a lot about just kind of preparing your subject, and treating that, again, it's about intentionality. And if you're trying to take a good photo with a human in it, you probably are going to want to let them know, and and prep them a little bit. Tell them that they're beautiful, and that it doesn't matter what they're doing. It's your job to make them look good, and and all this stuff to just get them kind of mentally prepared and loose and candid, and whatever you're going for. And maybe they're far away, and maybe that's the best way to do it, is to go out and set up and have some people wandering about or doing their activity, and just like you would with wildlife photography, have them never know you were even there, and just take lots of photos, try lots of angles to get them and the image that you want. But yeah, if your subject is not far away, don't just try to like snap them without them noticing. Involve your subject in the process, and unless this is a common subject for you, like my girlfriend, I think she knows I'm taking photos of her, and we've had this talk, so I don't tell her every time I'm taking a photo. And maybe that's best, because I can kind of catch her just enjoying a morning, sunrise, or an evening sunset, maybe just sipping a beverage, sitting in a camp chair, or, just, kind of her eyes leading towards the mountains or an animal or something. So yeah, as far as humans in images, just figure out if they're far enough away that you can kind of treat them as like a wildlife subject, where you guys aren't really interacting and you're just catching them from afar in their natural habitat, or whether you guys are going to talk about this as 2 people, and you trying to capture them in one of your images. So just figuring out what you're looking for, and thinking of them as a very dynamic part of the picture, that how you prepare them can impact a lot, the quality and their comfort level and all that stuff. That's mostly
Great.
what I'd say.
Thanks. I mean, one thing that learned right away as a photojournalist, and it definitely applies to personal work too, is the longer you photograph someone for like, the more comfortable they're going to become. And eventually, you don't always want them to be, ignoring you completely. But at some point, they're just going to forget you're there altogether. which is great. So, I mean, you know, I certainly have like a lot of photos of, you know, like friends or family or my wife or kids who like their eyes are like this big because they were doing something, they turned around and I was taking their picture. But if you keep it up, you know, eventually, you know, if you're on a multi-day backpacking trip or something, you know, by the end, no one's paying you any mind, whether you're just kind of snapping candid photos or whether you're kind of directing them. It's just going to kind of becomes old hat.
Yeah, and that's pretty much, I mean, my opening and closing words of that video, and maybe what I do think are some of the most essential advice for any would-be photographer, is just take lots of photos and be persistent, because I take a ton of bad photos, but I take a few good ones in amongst those, and I learn and enjoy the process. So I think that's all we can do, is just keep after what we're after and try to do better next time, and enjoy the process.
Absolutely. I think that your average like amateur photographer versus professional or approaching more professional, like what constitutes a lot of photos, like that means different things to different people. Working as a photojournalist, you know, I'd take 3 photos of somebody and they're like, what are you doing? You already took my photo. But for me, you know, I would take, you know, thousands of photos in a day, and not think anything of it. So there's kind of extremes in terms of what people think about as a lot, but so 10 photos is not a lot if you're out there listening. 20 photos is not a lot. Just keep going. Your memory card is basically free space, and you can delete it later if you don't want it. So you've got lots of room for error.
Awesome. Well, we are approaching time. So Nick, I wanted to give you the last word if you had any final advice, although just keep taking photos is kind of the best advice out there, I think. But any other parting thoughts you'd like to share before we adjourn?
Just noting the importance of stuff like this, talking to other people who share your passion, swapping notes and giving feedback. We're not doing kind of a portfolio audit here, but it's certainly helpful to involve, parts of your audience, whether it's your family or friends or whatever, and, just reach out to them and be like, hey, you want to look at some of my photos with me sometime and give me some feedback? Because you do not have to be an art professor to give good, important, useful feedback on a photographer's work. So just, looking at every opportunity as a chance to learn, and thinking of other people as all of them great founts of knowledge that you can learn from. That's what so just to ask people questions and engage your viewers, your audience.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you for letting us ask you a lot of questions. That was
Sure.
super helpful for me. And I look forward to seeing the amazing photographs that folks are going to take using this great advice from both your video and from this conversation. So we really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. I look forward to seeing what people create as well.